Before we begin, imagine walking into your barn every morning and seeing your strongest, most prized horse trembling with exhaustion, as if it had run through the night. Wouldn't you want to know the truth, no matter how dark it might be? If stories that grip you by the throat and refuse to let go are your kind of ride, then saddle up and hit subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about loyalty, trust, and the silent secrets that live in the quiet corners of rural America. Jacob Miller had always believed there were only three things a man truly owned in this world: his word, his land, and his animals. And on his modest ranch just outside Bozeman, Montana, he guarded all three with fierce devotion, especially Titan, the coal-black quarter horse he had raised from a gangly foal into a muscular, intelligent partner that had won him local barrel racing titles and drawn admiration from neighboring ranchers who would lean against white fence rails and whistle low, the animal's power. Titan had once been unstoppable, muscles rippling like dark water beneath the sun, eyes sharp, breath steady, even after long training sessions. But over the past month, something had changed, something that crept in like a cold wind through a cracked barn door. Because each morning Jacob found Titan drenched in sweat, flanks quivering, eyes ringed with fatigue, as if he had spent the night galloping across endless plains instead of resting safely in his stall. And at first, Jacob blamed himself, wondering if he had pushed the horse too hard or altered his feed incorrectly. So he adjusted the grain mixture, added supplements recommended by the vet, reduced training intensity, even scheduled blood tests that came back frustratingly normal, leaving Jacob with nothing but a gnawing sense that something was happening when he wasn't there. The ranch itself had been in his family for 3 generations, a spread of rolling pasture and weathered red barns that groaned in. Winter winds, bordered by pine woods that whispered at dusk, and Jacob lived alone there since his father's passing 2 years earlier, save for occasional visits from his younger sister Emily, who worked in real estate in town, and often urged him to consider selling a portion of the land to developers who were inching closer to the valley with promises of resorts and luxury cabins. But Jacob refused every offer because this land wasn't just property. It was memory and blood and sweat, and Titan was the beating heart of it. As Titan's exhaustion worsened, small details began to unsettle Jacob, like the faint scuff marks in the dirt outside the stall, the way the latch sometimes seemed slightly misaligned, though he distinctly remembered fastening it, and once, a thin line of mud traced along Titan's legs that did not match the dry conditions inside the barn. And though the ranch had security lights, they were old and unreliable, flickering with a tired buzz. So one night after finding Titan nearly collapsing during a light ride, Jacob stood in the barn aisle under the dim bulb and made a decision that would unravel everything he thought he understood. He drove into town the next morning and purchased a set of motion-activated cameras from a hardware store, telling the clerk he was worried about coyotes or maybe teenage trespassers, and spent the afternoon installing them discreetly in the barn rafters and above Titan's stall, angling them carefully to capture every inch of track movement without being obvious, because something in his gut told him this wasn't an accident or illness but intent. That first night, Jacob tried to sleep but found himself staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind press against the windows, and around midnight he gave up, pulled on his boots, and went to the small office off the kitchen where the camera feed streamed onto his laptop, the glow casting sharp shadows across his tired face. And at first, there was nothing but the quiet image of Titan shifting occasionally in straw, lowering his head to rest, the barn still and ordinary, and Jacob almost felt foolish for suspecting anything. But at 1:37 a.m., the screen flickered as motion triggered recording, and Jacob leaned forward, heart thudding, as the barn door slowly creaked open and a shadow slipped inside with deliberate care, a figure wearing a hooded jacket and moving with practiced familiarity rather than clumsy intrusion. And when the person reached Titan's stall, Jacob felt both relief and confusion, as Titan did not react with fear, but instead lifted his head and gave a soft nicker, as if greeting someone he recognized. The figure unlatched the stall and led Titan out gently, stroking his neck, and Jacob's breath caught because the body language was not violent, but purposeful. And within moments, they disappeared out of camera view toward the rear barn door that opened to the pasture, leaving Jacob frozen in disbelief, torn between storming outside immediately and continuing to watch to see what unfolded. And he chose to watch, fingers trembling on the desk, as the next camera feed showed Titan being mounted under moonlight, the rider sitting with surprising skill, guiding the horse into a swift, controlled gallop across the field, circling the perimeter fence in powerful arcs that sent dust rising like ghosts in the pale glow. Jacob's first emotion was fury, Someone was stealing rides on his horse in the dead of night, draining his strength. But that anger tangled quickly with a deeper confusion because the rider's posture, the fluid cues, the subtle rein work suggested someone who knew Titan intimately, someone who had trained with him before. And as the camera zoomed slightly when motion intensified, the hood shifted back just enough for Jacob to glimpse a familiar profile, a strand of blonde hair catching the light, and his stomach dropped as recognition slammed into him. It was Emily. For a long moment, he simply stared, unable to reconcile the image on the screen with the sister who had sat at his kitchen table just days before sipping coffee and discussing property taxes, and memories flooded him of their childhood rides together, of Emily's natural gift with horses that had once rivaled his own before she left for college and a different life. And as Titan raced beneath her with fierce energy, Jacob saw something else too, not recklessness but desperation, as if she rode not for thrill but for escape. When the footage ended around 3:12 a.m., showing Emily returning Titan carefully to his stall, wiping him down hastily, but not thoroughly enough to remove all sweat, and slipping back into the darkness, Jacob closed the laptop slowly, the barn outside now quiet and innocent-looking again. And he felt an ache more painful than anger, because betrayal from family cut deeper than any trespasser could. The next morning, he said nothing when Emily coincidentally stopped by, claiming she was in the area, showing a property, and he studied her face for signs of guilt, noticing the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached to pet Titan, who nuzzled her with unmistakable affection. And Jacob realized this had not been a one-time act, but a pattern repeated enough for Titan to expect her. Instead of confronting her immediately, Jacob decided to gather more evidence, to understand not just that she was riding, but why, because something about her midnight, that secrecy, suggested a story he did not yet see, and over the next week he recorded multiple nights of the same behavior. Emily arriving after midnight, riding Titan hard across the fields, sometimes practicing tight turns and timed sprints as if training for competition, then leaving before dawn. And Jacob's emotions evolved from shock to anger to something colder and more analytical, because he noticed subtle details. Once, a second vehicle's headlights flickered briefly at the edge of the property, but did not enter. Another time, Emily paused mid-ride to check her phone, face illuminated with anxious tension. And one night, she pushed Titan harder than before, urging him through exhausting drills that left him stumbling when she dismounted. And Jacob slammed his fist against the desk, watching that, whispering that she was going to ruin him. The twist came unexpectedly when Jacob decided to follow her instead of confronting her, waiting in his truck beyond the tree line the following night. Headlights off, heart pounding like a teenager spying on a secret. And when Emily arrived and began her usual routine, Jacob circled quietly along the outer fence to observe from a distance rather than through a screen. And what he witnessed shifted everything yet again, because halfway through the ride, another rider emerged from the woods. A tall man on a bay horse, posture confident, movements precise, and the two began racing side by side in synchronized patterns that were not random, but structured, competitive, and intensely practiced. And Jacob recognized the man after a moment. Ryan Caldwell, a former regional champion rider who had recently returned to Montana amid rumors of financial trouble and a failed training business. Jacob felt a surge of protective anger, suspecting manipulation. Perhaps Ryan using Emily and Titan to stage a comeback without investing in his own horse. But when the riders slowed and dismounted near the fence line, their conversation carried faintly through the still night air, and Jacob strained to hear fragments about qualifiers, entry fees, and one last shot. And it became clear that Emily was secretly training for a high-stakes competition with Ryan coaching her, using Titan because he was the only horse capable of competing at that level. The realization was a tangled knot of pride and fury. Pride that she still had the fire to chase excellence, fury that she risked Titan's health without his consent, and Jacob returned to the Chips Inuit house before they noticed him, mind racing. The following day he confronted her at last, not with shouting, but with a quiet statement that he had seen everything, and the color drained from Emily's face as she realized the truth was exposed. And what poured out then was not defiance, but a confession that rewrote the narrative Jacob had constructed in his head. After leaving town years ago, Emily had struggled in the competitive real estate world, burying her love of riding to build a stable career. But when their father died, she felt an emptiness that success could not fill. And learning of the upcoming national rodeo qualifiers in Denver reignited a dream she thought she had buried. Yet she knew Jacob would never risk Titan for a competition that could end in injury. So she turned to Ryan, who believed she still had the skill to win sponsorship money that could not only revive her passion, but potentially save the ranch from mounting tax pressures she had quietly discovered in public records. Jacob was stunned to learn that the ranch finances were worse than he realized, that overdue payments and rising land values had placed them on the brink of being forced to sell acreage, and Emily had kept it secret to avoid burdening him, intending to win enough prize money to stabilize everything before he ever knew there was danger. Anger softened into conflicted understanding, but Jacob's love for Titan remained paramount, and he told her she had endangered the horse through overtraining, that Titan's exhaustion was proof of the toll, and Emily broke down, admitting she had underestimated the strain and had grown increasingly desperate as the qualifier date approached. In that fragile space between siblings, Jacob faced a choice: forbid her from ever stepping near Titan again, or join her and channel her ambition into a safer, structured plan. And the true twist unfolded when he proposed something neither of them expected: that they train together openly, combining his deep knowledge of Titan's limits with her competitive drive, cutting Ryan out of the equation entirely. Emily hesitated, revealing one final shock. Ryan had invested his remaining savings into her entry fees and expected a share of any winnings. Binding her to him contractually and walking away could spark legal threats. Jacob, however, was no stranger to hard negotiations, and over the next tense days he met with Ryan, confronting him not with hostility, but with evidence from the cameras that showed the unauthorized use of private property, leveraging that to nullify any agreement and forcing Ryan to back down to avoid potential charges. And as the dust settled, Jacob and Emily began a grueling yet balanced training regimen under daylight skies rather than moonlit secrecy, giving Titan proper rest cycles, veterinary oversight, and measured conditioning, rebuilding his strength rather than draining it. The bond between brother and sister, once strained by secrecy, deepened through shared purpose, and Titan's vitality gradually returned, his coat gleaming, eyes bright again. And when the day of the qualifier finally arrived, they hauled Titan to Denver together, nerves humming like electric wires, stepping into an arena roaring with thousands of spectators. And as Emily mounted under the bright lights, she looked toward Jacob in the stands and saw not suspicion, but unwavering support. And the run that followed was not merely fast, but transcendent, every turn tight and clean, every stride powerful yet controlled, the culmination of trust restored and ambition tempered with responsibility. And when the final time flashed on the board, placing her at the top of the leaderboard, the siblings embraced with tears that carried years of unspoken tension. And in that moment, Jacob understood that the cameras he had installed out of suspicion had instead revealed a deeper truth about family, about dreams deferred and reclaimed, about the danger of silence and the power of confronting it. And back on the ranch weeks later, as Titan grazed peacefully beneath a wide Montana sunset, Jacob removed the cameras from the barn rafters, not because he no longer believed in vigilance, but because he had learned that sometimes the exhaustion we see on the surface hides not betrayal, but buried hope fighting to breathe. And in choosing to look closer rather than look away, he had not only saved his horse from collapse, but rescued his family from fracture, realizing that ownership was never about control alone, but about listening to the quiet signs, to the loved ones who were too afraid to speak, and to the steady heartbeat of a horse who carried them both back to each other.